Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. Today I will share with you my personal experience with gropers on Tokyo trains. These gropers and perverts are known as Chikan in Japanese. So sit back and enjoy the ride. When I moved to Japan, I started learning the basics of the language. I was very surprised when the word Chikan, meaning groper or pervert, came up in my beginner's Japanese textbook. At this stage, why on earth would I bother learning such a word? Shouldn't we first grasp the very essentials for navigating daily life before delving into the Pandora's box of human misconduct? And Chikan sounds more like a word that you would learn from your friend in a casual bar conversation after a few beers. In no way does it sound like a word that you're supposed to memorize for a language exam. Just imagine taking the TOEFL or the GRE and being asked the definition of stalker or groper. Are you kidding me? But it was not before long that I was convinced that in Japan, Chikan was indeed a key word everybody needs to know. I came to realize its importance shortly after spending 2 years working from home during the COVID-19 pandemic. On my first day back to the office in 2022, I remember standing on the station platform at 6 in the afternoon. I was completely burned out. Thankfully, my train arrived in less than 2 minutes. But as the train doors opened, I was quickly pushed in by a wave of people squeezing their way onto the train. It was suffocating. People just kept pouring in. I was drowning in a human tsunami. Suddenly, 2 men quickly sandwiched me, front and back. Great, now I was completely jammed. I couldn't move an inch. I gasped for air. But inside the train, there was the usual surreal silence. Passengers wore masks and seemed lost in their electronics as the train rattled on. Suddenly, the train took a sharp turn to the right, shoving us all to one side. It was at that exact moment that I felt something fishy going on. The guy in front of me had his tushy rubbing against my Johnny, swinging it to the rhythm of the train. What the heck? But before I could figure out if he had done this on purpose, the train took another sharp turn to the left, and now I could feel something rubbing on my tushy from behind. What was that? What was I supposed to do in this awkward situation? I had no clue. It was then that I remembered the word Chikan from my Japanese class, the only difference being that the 2 sweaty gentlemen were not using their hands as illustrated in my textbook. I quickly shot a look at the guy in front of me. He was enjoying some erotic manga on his phone and seemed completely aloof to his surroundings, and the guy behind me was watching a movie. How can they enjoy a movie in a train that feels like a can of sardines? Well, I guess good for them if this made them happy. Being Japanese, maybe they got used to packed vehicles since birth. But not me. I have never had my private parts gently caressed like this by some random strangers with sweaty armpits almost covering my nose. But this is Tokyo, Japan, where space is scarce. Everywhere feels oversaturated, overpacked with people, overstuffed with glass and steel towers. There's barely any leeway for stretching the body or the mind. And it is the golden playground for Chikans hunting for their next prey. In such crowded places, at times it is almost impossible to detect or pinpoint the Chikan. Pretty much like, who farted in the elevator? Ew, who knows? For foreigners who have never been to Tokyo, it might be hard to imagine the hordes of crowds and the rampant body rubbing on public transportation. But once you get into the local Japanese routine, Chikan simply turns into a staple word, a part of your daily vocabulary. The pervasiveness of Chikans can come as a surprise to many of us, including myself. After all, the Japanese are known for being extremely polite and well-behaved. Unlike the French, who like to greet one another with kisses on the cheeks and hugs, the Japanese avoid physical contact and prefer to bow, always keeping a safe distance. Even the deer in Nara, the ancient Japanese capital, have grown into the habit of bowing to tourists to show their gratitude for their tasty treats. Shockingly, many of these polite Japanese, once placed in crowded trains, show no qualms in shedding their outer layer of Mr. Well-behaved Angel to unleash their darker side, brazenly servicing other passengers with unwanted cuddling. If you don't believe me, how about if we Google Chikan and see what happens? Just look at the avalanche of news reports on your screen. On August 21st, for instance, a newspaper in Kobe splashed a headline about a graduate student arrested on suspicion of molesting a high school girl on a train. And the West Japan newspaper reported that an elementary school child was touched by a man. Not only has Chikan become a much talked about topic in Japan, it has also caught the attention of readers abroad. This past June, the BBC reported that Chikan is now an epidemic in Japan, spurred by its popularity in the adult entertainment industry. The BBC actually conducted a year-long investigation of an organized business where people film videos of passengers being groped on public transport. These videos are later sold online for big bucks. This gives us some clues as to why Chikan is such a rampant and complicated epidemic in Japan. Where there is sex, there is money, money, money. Even the Canadian and British governments warned travelers to Japan that inappropriate touching of female passengers on commuter trains are fairly common, and inappropriate physical contact may occur on busy subways and trains. How embarrassing is that for Japan? When traveling to Japan, you don't have to worry so much about terrorist attacks, being mugged, or being caught in the crossfire between the police and criminals. And if you lose your wallet or passport, there is no need to freak out. An honest Japanese will most likely hand them over to the nearest lost and found. But watch out, there might be a Chikan lurking in plain sight. If you're on a train, don't be surprised if you feel a hand gently rubbing your tushy, or, in some extreme cases, someone secretly records your private parts on a packed train and they end up starring in an online porn video. Like it or not, in Japan, this is part of the tourist experience. Japan's Chikan epidemic may just be the tip of an iceberg. What's brewing underneath is a more serious and chronic problem. In Japan, it's a man's world. Japan is a country notoriously known for its gender disparity in politics, education, and employment. Just look at the Global Gender Gap Index of 2023. Japan slipped even further in the rankings from 116th last year to 125th out of 146 countries. It's just doing a little better than Saudi Arabia. And let's not forget that Saudi Arabia is a country where women only recently received the right to drive a car. Unbelievable. Well, at least the Saudi women are moving forward. But let's cut Japan some slack. They've been trying very hard to make strides to improve the abysmal gender disparity. Indeed, Japan even took the initiative to host a G7 ministerial meeting on gender equality and women's empowerment in June 2023. When I found out about it, I thought, wow, this is great news. This time they must mean business. And the government showed their commitment by appointing the perfect person for the job, a male minister. Yes, you heard it correctly. And as this article from Time magazine clearly shows, this was no joke. Just take a look at the picture. Do you notice anything weird? Now, having a male minister leading talks about female empowerment obviously caused a real stir. How much more serious could Japan be about boosting women's status? Do they actually understand the purpose of the meeting? How tone-deaf could they be to send a man to lead such a meeting? If that's the case, how about appointing a drug lord to head the Drug Enforcement Administration in the US? But it seems that, to the Japanese government, empowering women is a man's job. Remember the former Japanese Prime Minister Yoshiro Mori? He served as the 2020 Tokyo Olympic chief. A few years ago, as Tokyo geared up to host the Olympics, he candidly observed, "If we increase the number of female board members, we have to make sure their speaking time is restricted somewhat. They have difficulty finishing, which is annoying." That was too much to swallow, even for the Japanese. He was sacked after these colorful comments made headlines. But it makes you wonder, doesn't he remind you of somebody? How many men in Japan and abroad were silently on board with his insightful remarks? As you can see, the Chikan epidemic is symptomatic of a serious disease. It's no coincidence that it made its way into the vocabulary of elementary Japanese, as it illustrates one thorny aspect of the daily routine in Japan. And more importantly, it also reveals the underlying social ills plaguing the country. It's no simple word. So how should we understand it? In essence, Chikan is the gender gap on steroids. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned for more videos from Shiroi V. See you next time!